is a very interesting developer community.
I'm glad somebody has asked this question.
This is where the magic happens.
This is primarily a question and answer show. So if any of you out there would like to ask questions.
All right. Well, welcome everybody. This is the first of a series of Chrome Apps Hangouts. My name is Pete LePage. I'm a developer advocate on the Chrome team. And I'd like to introduce you to a couple of the folks we've got with us today. We'll start with Paul.
Hi, I'm Paul Lewis. There are a lot of Pauls on the developer relations team, but yeah. So I'm Paul Lewis. I work on, as I say, the Chrome team, and I'm on the Chrome Apps team as well.
Awesome. And Paul, you're in London, right?
That is correct, yeah, London.
Awesome. All right, and I'll pass it over to Renato.
Hello, guys. I'm Renato Mangini, and I'm based in Brazil. I'm also a developer program engineer for the Chrome Apps team. Yeah, that's it.
Cool. And so you're in Brazil, and
yes.
All right. And so I'm here in New York. So we've got a pretty wide range of folks from all over the world, and we've been working on Chrome Apps now for the last couple of months. We announced Chrome Apps back at Google I/O. And there were a couple of sessions that we had at Google I/O. If you haven't had a chance to check those out, you should check those out. We'll put the links to the videos in the comments after the fact. But there were two sessions that were presented at Google I/O. The first one was just a general introduction to the next generation of Chrome packaged apps. And then the other one was how to convert or how to upgrade a web app to a Chrome packaged app. As we started thinking about building these Chrome packaged apps and how they evolved, there were a couple of things that we sort of thought about and realized. One is that the web ecosystem is really thriving. Chrome has more than 310 million active users around the world. We've seen many, many applications downloaded from the Chrome Web Store, and users are just asking for web apps all over the place. And we wanted to take web apps to the next step. And so we sort of tried to focus on four key components. The first is really about breaking out of the browser so that web apps feel like they're installed and they're native on your computer. They interact in the same ways so that when you click on your dock or on the start menu, the applications are just there. And they don't have an address bar, or they don't have a back or forward button or anything like that. The second piece was around enhancing the UI, providing a much better UI that is completely configurable by you, the web developer. When we say we take away the address bar, the back and forwards button, that's great, but the thing that allows you to really do is go and specifically design how the navigation or how the bar looks across the top so that it looks how you want it to look. The third piece we focused on was making these apps work offline by default. And offline by default is kind of a loaded comment, like it's got a lot of different meanings, but there's a couple of pieces that are really important there. These apps should work once they're installed, you hit run, they should just work. Whether you've got a fast internet connection, whether you've got a slow internet connection, whether you've got an intermittent internet connection. These apps should just work. And the reason that they just work is because we've taken all of the resources, the HTML, the JavaScript, the images, all of the assets for the application sit locally on your computer. And then any of the other resources, the data that may go back and forth, is the only thing that's transferred back and forth. So everything, in order for the app to run, sits locally, but the data goes back and forth. And then finally, the last piece is we wanted to give web developers access to things that they've never had before. In general, we kind of split them off into two different categories: system-level access and service-level APIs. With the system-level access stuff, you have access to things like the networking stack so that you can actually go and do raw TCP or UDP requests, right? You could never really do that with a web app before. If you wanted to do something like that, the most you could do is do an XML HTTP request. Maybe you could do a WebSocket or something like that, but you couldn't actually go and do a raw HTTP or UDP, or sorry, an TCP or UDP request. We also wanted to give developers access to the USB and serial and Bluetooth so that you can actually go and write apps that are more powerful than ever before. You can plug an infrared blaster in, or you can go plug in, say, some Lego Mindstorm. We'll show that in a little bit. But really being able to plug applications and make them more powerful, let them take advantage of the entire system. So by allowing developers to really build these things, we get a much bigger and more powerful set of APIs, and we allow developers to create much more interesting and much more exciting applications. So with that, I'm going to put a little video on, and we'll have Paul talk about that video. So let me get this video lined up here. All right, so Paul, I'll start this video, and you can talk about it.
All right, super.
So they can see the video now.
Okay, great. So what you're seeing is a Lego Mindstorms Nxt, which is just off the shelf. We didn't make any firmware changes or anything like that. And what we did is in 2 days, so you can build these apps pretty quickly. We set up serial over Bluetooth to talk to the robot. We're using, you're probably seeing in the video, the gamepad API. Renato, I think, controlling that little robot there with the gamepad. You can also see on the left-hand side the visualization of what the robot's doing. We used D3, which is a great visualization engine, and a bit of CSS 3D as well. So you can build these apps with all the technologies that you're used to, and you can see, as I say, that we used serial over Bluetooth to actually talk to a specific device, get feedback from the device, all using JavaScript, HTML, CSS, all those technologies that we use on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, now this was something that you guys sort of built just over a couple of days, just before I/O, as a proof of concept, right?
Yes, exactly. We built it like on Friday and Saturday, the week before I/O, because we wanted to show to present cool stuff on our Chrome office hours on the floor, on the Google I/O floor. So yeah, it was built on. Yeah, yes, exactly. There are like some people say, it's if you put some robots, you always get a lot of views.
Yeah.
In the internet, if you join robots and bacon, you explode. I was trying to do some demo with bacon included, but I couldn't figure out it. I had not much time to figure out that.
We could maybe like get a USB frying pan to cook the bacon, and then
I thought about that, but that wouldn't be very safe to present on Google I/O.
Yeah, might
there
get
were a bunch of people trying to get the bacon.
Yeah.
Have the robot bring you a bacon sandwich. What I should say is that the code for the robot is available on GitHub. We'll put the link up afterwards, but it's github.com/Google Chrome, and the repo is called number HTML5-app. So we'll link to that after this. So
we'll add the link to that in the comments as you watch the video after the fact. So cool.
All right.
Great.
Renato, do you want to give us a bit of an architectural overview of Chrome packaged apps, how they work, what's going on with them?
Yeah, sure. As the audience probably knows, this is the beginning of a long series of office hours about Chrome apps, and we will be covering several APIs. You will talk about that later. So this is a very high-level overview of what is a Chrome app. Let me share my screen here. Can you see it?
Yep. All right. So we've got that up.
Okay. So the idea of a Chrome app is not to be a website, is not to be standard web app. As Pete mentioned, the idea is to be as powerful as native, but easier to maintain, easier to code if you are a web developer, and more secure than native could ever be. The application stays in the cloud. The user always install your application from the cloud, but after the user installed your application locally, the user can execute that anytime he wants. I think from the 4 points that Pete mentioned on his talk, the most important from the developer point of view, the most important thing you have to have in your mind Chrome app is that it's offline, because there is that changes your mindset. That must change your mindset as the developer. The programming model of a Chrome app is the main point is the background page. The background page is, although it's called page, it's in fact a script and it's invisible. So there's no.
Let's just stop for a sec there, because I think that's a really important point. It's not quite a background page as you think about it in the traditional background page for one of the legacy Chrome packaged apps, but it's actually just a script that runs. So you don't actually have to write any HTML. It's just some JavaScript, right?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. The idea of this script is to create and control other windows. It's like a central piece of the whole application. If your windows have to communicate one to each other, ideally they should use the background page as the central point of communication. Also, to create other windows, ideally you should use the background page to create those windows. The background page also listens to user-insistent events. Of course, any page can listen to user events, but the background page is as the central piece. It can also listen to other events that page cannot listen. We will discuss these specific events when we talk about each APIs. So this is just a high-level overview. And this is very important. The background page it runs every time your application is running, and eventually the user can quit your application, but the system can also, if there is no other windows being shown, the system can suspend your background page. You can listen to this event. I will talk about that now on the app lifecycle. This is a very simple lifecycle diagram. You can see this on our documentation pages, and this is after the application is installed. So the user has the application installed, and it clicks on run. It clicks on the application, and the event on launch is executed. The event, what is called event page on this diagram is actually called, it's a background page I mentioned before. Okay, so the event page can or cannot open Windows. If it does, it goes to the Windows open state. If it does not, of course, it goes to no Windows open. But the most important thing here is that onSuspend is only called when there is no other Windows open. There is no Windows open. And you can get, of course, you can get this both on launch and on suspend events and do whatever you want. In the case of onSuspend, you cannot do much thing. It must be fast. You cannot do any asynchronous call or anything that takes too long. It should be fast, so you don't impact on the usability of your app. Okay, so this is the life cycle of an app. But what is an app or what is really an app, the contents of an app. Paul will show you a Hello World app right after, but just to give you a rough idea, an app is composed by a manifest. If you are an extension developer or an app developer, Chrome app developer, you know what it is. There are a few changes from the event manifest, but basically, if you are not already an extension developer, a manifest contains meta information, permissions that your app requests to run, and the information of what is the background script that should be executed. One relevant point here, on a traditional web application, not a Chrome app, you ask permissions, and the permission pops up in front of the user. The idea of a Chrome app is that most of the permissions can be given to your app when the user installs the app. So it's the experience from the user's point of view is much better, because if you are using an application that requires access to your USB devices, probably if you install that application, if you agree with that permission, that's okay. You don't want to get that pop-up every time you run the application, because the application hasn't changed what it requires from you. So that's all of that goes on manifest JSON. The background script is the script that that you put on the manifest, and it's the script that will listen to the unlaunched event and do whatever it has to do, depending on your application. Usually it will create one or more windows, but it can do anything. And I think this is the most important thing for a traditional web developer. You have, as I said before, you have to change your mindset. You are running offline. So you have to think about what your application needs to run, and you have to put it all on your content. You don't have to depend to get this information from the network.
Right.
Okay, so yeah, that's a high-level overview. Do you have anything to add?
All right. No, I think that's good. The cool thing is, if you've written a legacy Chrome packaged app, you're already well on your way. And it's just a matter of making a few changes and then starting to dive into some of the new APIs that are available to you. If you've written just a web app that's hosted, you're going to have a few things that you're going to want to sort of play with and change and learn as these
like embedding everything on the same package.
Exactly. But really all you're doing is taking all the files and putting them into the zip file. Instead of having them sit on the server side, they're sitting on the local side. Cool. Well, Paul, do you want to tell us about some of the new APIs that are available?
Definitely. Okay, so we've heard a bit about the overview and the architecture and those kind of things. And so one of the things that, as we mentioned at the start, we've got these new APIs, specifically some of these system-level APIs, which I think are kind of really exciting. And what I want to do is I just want to highlight a few of those. What I'll probably do is show you my screen in a sec. Let's do that now, actually. Let's go for that. So if you were to go to developer.chrome.com/apps, and on the left-hand side, you've got the menu. The interesting one is the Chrome JavaScript APIs, which gives you an overview of all the APIs that are available to you in your Chrome packaged apps. Now, I'm not going to go through all of them because it would take quite some time. And you want to probably dive into this and look at the things that are of particular interest to you. But there are some new ones, and you probably want to look at those. Context menus are quite interesting because those are things that you'd expect to see in a native app. So we wanted to give you those as well for your
right. So those give you the right click on items or on whatever, right?
Yeah, exactly right. So these are things that you almost any user of your app would expect if they're going to be launching these apps outside of the browser. They're going to start right-clicking, those kinds of things. So, as I say, you can dive into some of these more specifically yourself. The socket I found particularly interesting because now you can actually use your app as a TCP or a UDP client, which is the first time that you've been able to do those kind of things, directly.
Now, what kind of apps could you write with the TCP and UDP APIs?
Yeah, so some people have written IRC clients.
Okay.
So what else have you seen?
Well, that's a whole new apps. I think this opens up for a whole set of apps that requires a network. It's really I can't not even imagine what developers will come with.
Yeah, that's kind of the cool part is we have no idea what you guys are going to do with this.
Yeah.
Cool. You want to keep talking about?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is about sockets is, historically with WebSockets, you needed to be able to control both sides. Now with the TCP socket stuff, particularly, you're in control of the app side, but the service you're talking to may not support traditional WebSockets, but they may support a TCP connection. So it just broadens what you can do. The thing that I've got on screen is this experimental APIs, which contains some of the really interesting ones for me personally, but particularly the Bluetooth and the USB. So as Pete said at the start, we're letting you talk to devices. And all of these are under the experimental namespace. And we should mention that you'll have to ask for experimental permissions, and apps that are going into the Chrome Web Store, they don't allow you to use those experimental APIs. So this is very much a kind of early stage thing where you can put these in, start building these apps, and then as they become available and stable.
Specifically about the Bluetooth, just a warning that it's being implemented on Windows, Linux, and Mac. Currently, it only runs on Chrome OS, but as we talk, the engineer team is working on the other platforms for Bluetooth only. Okay, so the developer should not expect on these experimental APIs completely done and finished. It will have a lot of changes. Of course, there are a lot of bugs probably, and we expect the developer feedback to fix those bugs.
Yes, exactly right.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point, that a lot of these are in experimental mode right now, and you can't actually go and upload experimental stuff to the Chrome Web Store. As these things start to mature and as Chrome packaged apps hit a maturity level later this fall, we will have a point where you will be able to upload them. You will actually be able to go use them in real time without having to have the experimental flag on there and know that they won't change out from under you. Right now we're still making sure they work and getting feedback from you as you use them to make sure that they meet your needs and they do the things that you want them to do.
Yeah. One API I really wanted to pull out at this stage, and something that I encourage you guys to go and look at, is, as we've kind of said several times, offline by default. That's a really core part of these apps. And because of that, things like storage APIs are really helpful. We've got chrome.storage.local and chrome.storage.sync, and the sync version of local. And the point of the...
Repeat that, because I think you just sort of bugged out there for a second.
Okay.
At least on my computer, so maybe for other folks too.
Okay, so the APIs you want to look at are chrome.storage.local and .sync. And these are the two APIs specifically for storing your data. They're specifically designed for smaller amounts of data. If you need larger amounts of data, you might want to look at the standard HTML5 file system API and so forth. But the point of these is that they degrade gracefully, like a lot of the APIs. They degrade gracefully under poor network conditions, and they are there specifically to allow you to write sensible offline focused apps. So I really want to sort of make that point. And then, as I said before, we've got these other really exciting APIs like the system level ones and so forth. So go and have a look, go and have a play. Right now, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to show you how you can get started with the samples, because we've got a good number of samples. So I'm going to screen share once again, and let's see what you see.
So with all of these samples that Paul's going to start showing you, you can actually start playing with them. You'll need either Chrome Dev or Chrome Canary, because this is not something that we've has made it down to beta or to the stable channel yet. So you can always try it in Chrome Canary or Chrome Beta, or sorry, Chrome Canary or Chrome Dev. The one thing that I tend to recommend is running Chrome Canary and either Chrome Beta or Chrome Stable, because the way if you do that, then you can have two instances of Chrome installed without having to worry about them clobbering each other. You don't have to worry about going and playing with something in Chrome Canary and having it crash on a regular basis or anything like that, because it is Chrome Canary. So if you have those two, you can always go and play with the latest stuff. The other option would be to install Chromium as a
which is github.com/google-chrome/chrome-app-samples. And
all right, and we'll provide a short link to this as in the notes.
Yeah. So you can see we've got a ton of samples here. And again, I'll let you go and have a play with those. Now, the main thing that you'll need to do is enable the experimental extension APIs. Because when we ask, as we mentioned in the manifest, you ask for permissions. One of the permissions you're going to be asking for is experimental, almost certainly, as you try some of these things out. So you have to enable that with a flag that you're allowed to ask for that particular permission. So if you go to About Flags or Chrome Flags, you'll see this experimental extension APIs, which you enable, and that's very important. One of the things that we've done to try and make your lives a little bit simpler, which I really love, is we have I've got my terminal open here. We have something called Dojo, which is under the Chrome App Samples folder. I'm just going to list that out. You can see that I've got a build script, so if I just run build, takes a couple of seconds. And out the other side, if I go to my extensions now, which I'll make a little bit bigger, and I'm in developer mode, which allows me to load an unpacked extension, which can be useful sometimes. If you go to the Dojo build folder and select that, you get yourself a convenient new app which will allow you to launch all the other samples. So you can see when I go to a new tab here, I've now got this Chrome Apps Dojo, which when I launch, and you'll see the window we were talking about, this hasn't got any additional Omnibox, it's not got any other buttons, it's just a window.
That's a Chrome package app, right?
Yeah, this is a Chrome package app.
Sweet.
Yeah, so I'm going to just launch one of our samples, which is a singleton window. We'll talk about these samples in much more detail over the coming weeks.
Paul,
yes.
Can I interrupt you a second? There is a new version of Dojo that is much better and much reliable than this. I'm not sure if you want to run it. Do you want me to broadcast here, or you go ahead with this version? Yeah, you go for it.
Yeah, if you've got a newer version, yeah, okay. Feel free.
So I think the key point here is that you can actually go and sync, use GitHub to just do a pull and make sure that you've always got the latest stuff, so that as we go and provide updates, as we make changes to the APIs, we're keeping the samples and all that kind of stuff up to date, so that you can stay up to date yourself.
Yeah.
Just go ahead.
Okay, so what I'm actually going to do is I'm also just going to quickly show you one of the other samples, which is the Hello World. So I'll actually load that one directly. You can see Hello World just dropped in there. You see this little guy. Got that. That's very handy. So what I'll do is I'll now show you the underlying code, which is, again, it's pretty simple. Just briefly, This is the manifest, which if you've been making apps to date, you'll recognize instantly. It's just a JSON file. Version 2 is important. Let's bump the text up here.
That looks much better. Thank you.
Okay. Version 2 is what's going to trip you into the new packaged apps, so that Chrome knows that that's what you're talking about. Name, version, icons. And then this is the bit here where you're saying, here's the background script, here's the main hub of activity, which in this case is main.js. And then I'm asking for the experimental permissions. Okay? And then inside the main.js, which is that background, you'll see that I'm actually, we've got this chrome.experimental.app on launch, which is a listener that when your app is first launched, this is the listener that we're going to have catch that event. And all it does is create a window which says inside, hello world. So that's as much as you need to start making packaged apps today. Obviously, all the samples that we've got have got sort of a variety of APIs that they're using and a variety of permissions. So there's plenty to go at, and we're going to be adding more over time, I'm sure, as well.
Cool. So again, to go get that stuff, all you have to do is go to GitHub, and you can download the zip file there, or you can just clone the repository to your local machine, and you're good to go.
Exactly.
Sweet. So that's what's the URL for that again?
It's github.com/google-chrome/chrome-app-samples.
All right. So these are this series of office hours are something that we're going to be doing pretty much once a week. We're going to do it every Tuesday at 9:30 Pacific, noon 30 or 12:30 Eastern, and I think, Paul, for you in London, it's 5:30 right about. Well, I guess it's a little after 5:30 now, but we'll start at 5:30.
Yeah.
For those of you who are in Brazil, we'll start at, I guess, 1:30 in the afternoon.
1:30 exactly.
Yeah. So we're trying to get as much of the world in as we can. But one of the things that we want to do is know what things that you guys think are most interesting. What APIs you want us to focus on. What are the pieces of the new Chrome packaged apps that you really want to dive into? And so to do that, we'll put the in the notes, but we've got a survey that we'd like you guys to go fill out. You can get to the survey at goo.gl/7ZQUN. All of those letters are in capital letters. Again, that's 7ZQUN. Again, and we'll put this in the slides so that you can check that out after the fact and fill that in, because we'll then choose which sessions you guys want to go for. So at this point, I want to open it up to your questions. You guys have been submitting questions through the moderator, and so we've taken a look. We've got a few answers already for us. I'm going to take the first question because it's a kind of fun question and something that we talked a little bit about at I/O. But when will you support Chrome apps for Android? And at Google I/O, Sundar, as he was talking about these new Chrome packaged apps, or the updated Chrome packaged apps, said that this is something that we want to bring to other platforms as well. But we don't really have a date, or we don't really have a time frame where we've said, hey, this is going to happen within this date or time yet. We want to make sure that we get the new APIs locked and really solid before we do that. We want to make sure we get the experience great. We want to make sure that we get this piece right before we start moving on and moving to other parts. The second question is another fun question here. What are the top 3 conditions to get featured on the Chrome Web Store? Do you give preference to apps using Google Checkout, HTML5, requiring users to sign in via Google accounts? And typically the thing that we say to folks is that we just want you to go build really great web apps. As developer advocates and developer programs engineers, I think we all have a different list of things that we look at in terms of great apps. And that's a great question for us to bring up in a future event are what are some of those things. In general, I want it to feel really appy. I want it to look beautiful. I want it to have a really good user experience. The other thing that I recommend people do is have a look at the web app field guide. So if you go to html5rocks.com/web app field guide, there's some good information there. Paul, Renato, do you guys have anything that you look for in a really great web app?
No, for me, I think you hit the nail on the head. It's got to be something that people love using, and I think, you know, a well-built app, well executed, that fills a real user need. That's what I personally would be looking for.
Yeah, exactly. I second that. It's a perfect answer.
Cool. So somebody asked a question, what are the limitations of app scripts embedded in Google Sites? For example, what libraries, APIs cannot be included? I don't really have a good handle on the AppScript stuff, but the AppScripts team does a hangout on Thursdays. This week it's at 11:30 Eastern Time. I'd recommend you go to that hangout and ask them there. They're more than happy to answer, and they're a good group of folks. So why are there no human interface guidelines for Chrome OS and Chrome packaged apps? I seriously doubt that Chrome apps can compete with native apps without having a consistent look and feel. Paul, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, let me. Yeah, so I think what we would say is that consistent UX, UI, that's really important stuff, and we want to make sense. We want to make sure that what we say adds up and it makes sense to users and it makes sense to developers.
Yeah.
And so it's something that we've been talking about internally. We don't have a release or anything like that, but we do think that's good and it's a really good idea.
Yeah. And just a reminder, if you have questions, you can go post them on the moderator and vote questions up and down. The questions that you want to hear answers to, vote them up. The ones that you're not really interested in, vote them down, or if you think it's not a good question, because we'll take your questions here. So Jarek from, I think, Poland has another question. When will we have full control over main menu and context menus in packaged apps? Currently, there's no way to set up a main application menu. On the OS X, standard Chrome menu is shown. And the context menu can only extend with submenus. Renato, do you want to answer that one?
Sure. Yeah, you're absolutely right, Jarek. The main menu currently cannot be changed currently, but it's being worked on. And the context menu, I saw your email on the Chromium apps list, and it's the current API exists, and we want your feedback. I would ask you to please submit this feedback through crbug.com with a special use case that you cannot do with current context menu, and we will work with the engineering team to check that and perhaps even change the API if it makes sense for a broad audience. But definitely this feedback is very important for us.
Yeah. Cool. So Vishal from Mumbai said he's made a GWT application and is trying to make it a packaged app, but he's facing some issues. What would be the best way to solve those issues? And he posted a link to his specific question.
Yeah, can I answer that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, I'm a GUID developer also, so one of the first things I look at when I start working with Chrome apps was how I could move a GUID application to Chrome apps. And there are some issues because we haven't talked about this today, but we will talk a lot about CSP on the next session. And CSP is a set of restrictions that the Chrome app must follow to be a Chrome app. And some of these restrictions, Vishal, you know that because you posted that on your question, does just allow some of the resources, some of the features of GWT. A simple GWT application should work on a sandboxed iframe. I'm sorry for all of the audience that have not heard about Sandbox iframes. We will talk about that later also. But
So let's just talk. I'll give a 30-second version of that. Content security policy basically says it protects your apps from, helps to protect your apps from cross-site scripting vulnerabilities. And it limits can run, how it gets run, and a couple of things like that. So that means within Chrome packaged apps, you can't do a certain set of things. But you can have a sandboxed iframe that allows those things to happen, but it's sandbox, so it lives off in its own little world, and you can't easily communicate with the rest of your application. So,
yes.
Renato, I'll pass it back to you, and you can...
Okay, so GUID compiles your code, and it uses some of the things that CSP tries to avoid, which is the new function, using the constructor of the function with string scripts. So you were supposed to run a very simple GUID application on a Sandbox iframe. If you are not, I would ask you to submit a simple sample that doesn't work, and we'll check it out.
Yeah.
We'll try to make it happen.
That's a great point. If you find bugs as you're building these things, if things aren't working right, the forums are a great place to go post your questions. But as well, file bugs with us. We need to hear about these things so that we can get them fixed and ready for you to go start using in production code. So the next question is, can we get an API like the Chrome storage sync that syncs to our own custom back endpoint? And that's a great feature request from Rob in Montana. Rob, it would be great if you could go file that on Chromium bugs so that we can go and start looking into that and see what happens. But that's the best place to go file feature requests or anything like that. So the next question from Anatoly in the European Union. Awesome news on ways to authenticate users via Google through an API. However, the dialogue looks really scary to users, like developers are going to steal their email. Facebook has an option to provide an anonymous ID of users without asking for email. I guess that's not really a question, but maybe a feature request? Anatoly, if you would, again, same thing, go file a feature request on the Chrome apps or in the bug database. That'd be great. So we've got a couple minutes left, but do you have any plans for exposing names of system fonts to packaged apps? This is a feature for this is a must for any app that provides rich text editing capabilities. And Yarek has an API proposal already on as a GIST on GitHub. Paul, do you want to talk about this for a sec?
Yeah, I think just generally about fonts. I mean, if it's a system font that is obviously comes with the OS, then you should be able to use CSS as you normally would. You should expect the standard kind of browser behavior there. If you're considering embedding fonts, you should consider the offline first thing, that you won't be loading those resources remotely, that you'll want to bundle up those fonts with your app, and obviously you need to make sure that you check any licensing and so forth to do with that. But in general, what you're suggesting, which I think is can we pull a list of fonts on this particular system? I think that it's another feature request. It's a great feature request. Please file it as such, and we will we'll take a look at it with the engineering team and see what we can do there.
All right, awesome. Well, Renato, I'm going to pass the next question to you. What's the difference between the browser tag and an iframe tag with the sandbox attribute introduced in HTML5? Aren't iframes already running in a separate process?
Yeah, the browser tag is also a new thing for most of the audience. The idea of the browser tag is to be a completely separate instance of browser-like element. So it has its own cookie jar, it has its own storage, and it's completely independent of your app in general. The iframe tag, the sandbox iframe, is different because the idea is to be part of your application. None of those are, we created those to support a few use cases, but our idea is not that you are being used both of these. Our idea is to really use the power of Chrome apps. You should use those only if you cannot do the same thing outside of both browser tag and iframe tag. So to simply answer the tag, the iframe, the question is the iframe tag is part of your application, and the browser tag is to be a complete separate part of complete separate process.
Cool. All right. Well, we'll take one more question, and then we're a little bit over time. Next question is, why would you deprecate Flash in favor of making developers rewrite all their stuff in HTML5? And I'd like all three of us to answer this, because I think this is a really sort of cool reason to me, is that we really think HTML5 provides all of the features and power, and in fact even more than Flash does. And we really want to see the web built on open standards and take advantage of the things that we can now do with HTML5 that we've never been able to do before. With things like CSS animations, with transitions, you can get some pretty awesome experiences that work across all devices, no matter where the user is coming from. So by pushing these towards an open platform, you get a lot more users, you get a lot more ability to do stuff, and I think it's the way the platform's really moving. Paul, Renato, you want to take a stab?
You covered the main points that I would have got there, Pete. Well played. I think it's exactly as you said. I mean, the promise of the web, to some degree, is ubiquity, and certainly HTML5 and its support across these new range of devices that we're seeing, tablets and phones. They've really come on in the last few years. They're a much closer match to HTML5. And we see, as Pete said, that's the direction that the industry's been going in, and we're putting our weight behind that and supporting that as the appropriate platform, really, on which to build.
Yeah.
Yeah, I understand the rage of the developer that has already a developed application and just want to move to the new platform without changing anything. It's completely understandable. But there are so many new and cool things on the HTML5 side that I suggest that if you have a Flash application, consider moving it to HTML5.
Cool. All right. So I think that about wraps up for today. We're going to be back with you guys live next Tuesday, again at 9:30 Pacific, 12:30 Eastern, 5:30 in London. And in fact, we're going to be joined by another Paul. We'll have two Pauls. And it's always fun to have more Pauls. And in fact, a bunch of us are all going to be in the same location. So we'll have a fun little opportunity to interact right next to each other. So with that, I'll say thank you guys very much. Look forward to seeing you again in the near future.
Thanks, guys. Fill in the survey. Make sure you tell us what you want to hear about.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Bye.
Alrighty. Bye-bye.